What are the hidden engines of rapid change within communities, especially, when they're facing adversity? Imagine movements of faith not slowly building in comfortable environments, but sort of exploding into existence amidst uncertainty and even danger. Today, we're plunging into the surprising common threads that appear when new spiritual communities flourish against the odds. We're focusing on church planting movements, or CPMs. Uh, think of them as situations where churches just multiply rapidly within a specific people group or region.
Right. And our goal here is really to understand the underlying dynamics of these CPMs. We're drawing on the observations of people who've been on the ground practitioners who've identified these recurring factors that seem to be present in most CPMs around the world.
Hmm.
It's vital to understand that these aren't strict rules or like a magic formula. They're significant patterns, and they offer some really fascinating insights into how change happens.
Exactly. So over our time together, we'll be exploring 10 of these frequently observed factors. Our mission is basically to give you a much deeper understanding of how faith takes root and spreads in diverse and often challenging contexts, places where maybe you might least expect it. Hopefully by the end, you'll have a fresh perspective on how communities adapt, evolve, and experience transformation in all sorts of ways. Okay, let's unpack the first of these engines of change, a climate of uncertainty in society.
Yeah, this one's fascinating. There's this strong correlation we often see between societal upheaval and the flourishing of these movements, whether it's the collapse of an old order, the trauma following conflict, or even the sort of destabilizing effects of rapid modernization. It appears that times of uncertainty frequently create, well, fertile ground for new spiritual communities to emerge.
The examples from our sources really jump out, don't they? Think about Cambodia after the unimaginable horrors of the Khmer Rouge, or those seismic shifts in Central Asia following the disintegration of Soviet communism. Even in Latin America, that move away from established socialist ideologies created a period of instability. And it's not always dramatic, sudden events. Sometimes it's a long-standing condition, like the persistent challenges in Bihar, India.
Exactly.
So it's not just about religious conversion, is it? This suggests that when people's established structures and beliefs are challenged, they become more receptive to entirely new frameworks, spiritual, political, maybe even technological.
That's a great point.
It really highlights the power of disruption as a catalyst for change.
Absolutely. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we see this pattern across very different groups. Consider the historical experience of Europe's gypsies as social outcasts, or the Maasai of East Africa grappling with the significant pressures of modernity, or even refugee populations desperately seeking a new sense of stability and meaning. These are all contexts marked by considerable uncertainty where CPMs have taken hold.
It almost seems counterintuitive, doesn't it? You'd naturally assume stability would be more favorable for growth.
Yeah, you would think so.
But our source material actually contrasts these environments with more stable, affluent societies like Western Europe, Japan, the USA, places where there can sometimes be a sense of spiritual complacency or perhaps just less urgency for radical change.
Right. And this raises an important question. Why this connection? Perhaps uncertainty weakens the grip of old assumptions, and creates a deeper hunger for something more, something that feels enduring and reliable when everything else is shifting.
That makes sense.
When the foundations of society feel shaky, people may just be more willing to explore entirely new sources of meaning and hope. And as our source points out, when we look at the 21st century with its many regions facing instability across Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe, Latin America, the Middle East, the potential for CPMs in these areas seems pretty significant.
Okay, so our second factor is one that might raise an eyebrow. Insulation from outsiders. Now, on the surface, this seems paradoxical, right? I mean, after all, the initial message of faith often comes from outsiders.
That's a crucial point to acknowledge right up front. Yeah. The initial introduction often involves someone crossing cultural or geographic boundaries. However, what's fascinating here is that many CPMs tend to flourish in places that are, well, geographically or culturally challenging for Westerners to access.
Right.
Think again about Cambodia, Mongolia, parts of China, Maasai land, Central Asia, and those more remote regions in India like Bihar and Orissa.
So is this just a coincidence of geography? Or is there something about this relative insulation that actually contributes to the strength of these movements?
The source suggests it's likely a combination of factors. For one, as we touched on earlier, the greatest concentrations of people who haven't had the opportunity to hear the message are often in these more isolated locations.
Okay.
But there's also the potential unintended consequence of easy access to external resources.
Ah,
It can, without meaning to, foster a sense of dependency, potentially shifting the focus of local leaders away from identifying and utilizing the resources within their own community towards relying on what's being offered by those from outside.
that makes a lot of sense, yeah. If the expectation is that help will always come from elsewhere, there might be less incentive to develop local leadership and solutions.
Exactly. And the example of the evangelical gypsy movement in Western Europe is interesting here. While Western Europe isn't geographically isolated in the traditional sense, the growth of this movement wasn't primarily driven by large external missionary organizations heavily focused on their specific communities. It largely grew organically from within their own cultural context. The key insight here, I think, is that while outside involvement can be vital for the initial introduction of a message, a degree of insulation can actually be instrumental in fostering local ownership, resourcefulness, and ultimately long-term sustainability.
Our third factor takes us into a more difficult but crucial area: a high cost for following Christ.
Yeah.
This isn't just about a change in lifestyle. We're talking about significant personal risk.
Precisely, yeah. In many CPM environments, becoming a Christian can come with very serious consequences, echoing the experiences of early believers and, well, those who have faced persecution throughout history. This kind of pressure, as incredibly challenging as it is, can paradoxically serve to refine the church, strengthen the commitment of its members, and validate its witness within the wider community.
Right.
It also acts as a very effective filter, naturally leading those who aren't deeply convinced to maybe fall away.
The anecdote in the source material about Muhammad and Ismail in North Africa really brings the potential cost into stark focus. It's quite powerful, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. What's so impactful about their experience is the raw reality it illustrates.
Hmm.
Both men were simply being questioned by the authorities because of their interest in Christianity. Ismail, while drawn to Jesus, sort of hesitated when directly asked to choose between his former faith and Christianity.
Mhm.
Tragically, his friend Muhammad, who had openly and unequivocally embraced his new faith, well, he disappeared after their detention and was never seen again. Ismail himself faced intense pressure and even physical violence before finally declaring his commitment to Jesus.
It's just a sobering reminder of the very real dangers faced by individuals who choose to follow their conscience in many parts of the world. And as the source emphasizes, this wasn't an isolated incident. In CPM environments, believers frequently face the loss of their jobs, ostracization from their families and communities, imprisonment, and, in the most extreme cases, even the ultimate sacrifice for their beliefs.
Yeah.
This high cost really underscores the depth of commitment involved and the transformative power of the message that compels people to persevere despite such profound risks.
It really does. It stands in stark contrast to contexts where faith might be more of a cultural norm than a life-altering decision with significant personal consequences.
Absolutely. And this challenging reality leads us directly into our fourth factor: bold, fearless faith. I mean, I can only imagine the immense courage required to maintain one's beliefs when facing that level of potential danger.
The source material really highlights the intense fear that believers in these environments can experience, particularly in regions under certain legal systems where converting from the majority religion can actually carry the death penalty.
Right.
That chilling explanation from the Egyptian friend, "My blood is not forbidden," powerfully illustrates the gravity of the situation for those who choose a different spiritual path.
It's almost impossible for many of us in more secure environments to fully grasp that level of threat. How do individuals even find the strength to overcome such profound fear?
And that's precisely the remarkable aspect, isn't it? When new believers choose to be bold and open about their faith, despite this overwhelming fear, it creates an atmosphere that actually fuels the church planting movement.
Oh, interesting.
Their courage becomes infectious, inspiring others to seriously consider the message and to stand firm in their own burgeoning convictions.
The story of the Maasai warriors during that church planter training is so inspiring and relevant here. Could you maybe share that powerful example again?
Yeah, it's a great one. What's so striking about that encounter is the unexpected reaction of these men, known for their bravery, right?
Hmm.
They were hearing for the first time about the very real persecution faced by Christians in some parts of the Muslim world. And their response wasn't one of fear or retreat, but this powerful desire to stand in solidarity with those facing such immense challenges.
Wow.
The missionary had simply asked them to consider the potential cost of following Christ within their own context. Instead, those who hadn't yet fully committed to Christianity stepped forward, declaring their willingness to face persecution if that's what it meant to follow Jesus.
That's incredible.
It truly highlights a deep-seated fearlessness that seems to resonate with the spirit of new believers in CPMs across the globe.
Moving on to our fifth factor, we have family-based conversion patterns. Now, this feels like a significant departure from the individualistic way many of us in the West often think about matters of faith.
It really is.
Think of it this way. Instead of one person deciding to follow a new path and potentially being isolated, the decision often happens within the existing web of relationships.
Mm-hmm.
This creates immediate support and accountability within the family unit, making the transition and the new faith more integrated into their social fabric.
Absolutely. While individual convictions are undoubtedly important, in the vast majority of church planting movements, the spread of the gospel occurs through existing family and community networks. It's a much more relational and communal approach compared to the Western emphasis on personal, individual choice as the primary driver.
Our source material suggests that individualistic approaches by those coming from more westernized contexts can sometimes even lead to unintended negative consequences,
Right.
like the marginalization and eventual departure of new converts from their families and communities.
That's a critical insight, yeah. When the sole focus is on the individual's decision, it can inadvertently create a disconnect between the new believer and their foundational social structures. In contrast, within CPMs, new believers typically prioritize sharing their newfound faith with their immediate and extended families, even when they face the potential for persecution.
Right.
This pattern of family-based conversion is observed across diverse cultures, among those from Muslim backgrounds in West Africa, the evangelical gypsy communities of Spain, and throughout much of Latin America, Asia, and Africa. And the prevalence of house churches often plays a significant role in accelerating this family-centered spread.
And the story of the Afghan family in Pakistan beautifully illustrates this interconnectedness, doesn't it?
Oh, it's a truly compelling example of how faith can take root and flourish within an entire family unit. You had individual encounters with Christians, the sharing of scripture, and then those remarkable parallel dreams experienced by the father and the grandfather, the respected elder of the clan.
Right, the dreams.
Yeah. It wasn't just one person making a solitary decision. It was a collective movement toward faith, culminating in the conversion of all 13 family members within a single week.
Incredible.
The crucial takeaway here is that CPM missionaries often intentionally focus on fostering family harvests
Oh.
rather than solely on individual conversions, recognizing the powerful influence of those deep familial bonds.
Okay, our sixth factor is the immediate enlistment of new believers. This idea of getting new converts actively involved right away feels very different from more established church models where there's often, a longer period of integration.
Precisely, yeah. In most church planting movements, new converts aren't relegated to the role of passive observers for an extended period. They're quickly integrated into the active life and work of the church, participating rather than just attending. The example from China, where new believers are intentionally channeled into forming new church gatherings, effectively requiring them to take an active role from the outset, is a powerful illustration of this principle.
And that incredible story about the elderly Bhojpuri man in India who planted 42 churches in his very first year as a believer. That's just astounding.
Isn't it?
It really challenges the notion that you need years of formal theological training before you can begin sharing your faith in a meaningful way.
It certainly does. Traditional church models often emphasize a more extended period of sort of proving oneself, of doctrinal instruction, before entrusting new believers with significant responsibility. While discipleship is absolutely essential, delaying active involvement can sometimes lead to new believers losing their initial enthusiasm, feeling disconnected, or even drifting away due to a sense of not truly belonging or contributing.
Right.
And while many established churches are increasingly focusing on improving their discipleship processes, the emphasis can sometimes lean more towards doctrinal instruction than immediate practical assimilation and active participation.
The example of the Vietnamese physicians in Southeast Asia is also fascinating in this context. They were envisioning a church planting movement even before they themselves became Christians.
Right. It perfectly embodies this principle of practicing the end from the beginning.
Hmm.
In CPMs, you often see immediate baptism, immediate sharing of the core message, immediate sharing of whatever discipleship they have just received, often just days or weeks prior,
Uh,
and immediate involvement in forming new house church gatherings. The primary focus tends to be outward, on starting new works and reaching more people, rather than solely on the internal growth of existing congregations.
mm.
There is a willingness to entrust new believers with responsibility early on, recognizing the inherent power of their fresh faith and the potential for rapid growth through multiplication.
Our seventh factor shifts our focus to the profound importance of worship in the heart language. It intuitively makes sense, doesn't it, that this would create a much deeper and more personal connection.
Oh, it's far more than just intuitive. It's about allowing the core message of faith to resonate at the deepest emotional and cognitive level within a people group. While there are certainly CPMs that emerge in communities where a full translation of Scripture in their language doesn't yet exist,
Right.
even in those instances, their worship, their songs, their prayers, their testimonies are almost always expressed in their heart language, the language they think and feel in most naturally.
The source provides some really vivid and moving examples of this. Could you share a couple that really stand out?
Absolutely. I mean, imagine the heartfelt Azeri praises rising near the Caspian Sea,
Mm.
the vibrant Amharic songs filling the air in Addis Ababa, the passionate worship of the Dalit believers in Uttar Pradesh, or the joyful singing and dancing of the Maasai as they recount biblical stories in their own unique way.
Yeah.
These images truly paint a powerful picture of how the gospel takes on a local flavor and becomes deeply personal when expressed in the language that speaks directly to the soul. Even that anecdote about the Buddhist monks in Myanmar who spontaneously began creating chants, praising God, using melodies and forms familiar from their own tradition,
That's amazing.
it highlights this innate human desire to connect with the divine in a way that feels authentic and familiar.
It also brings to light the significant challenges that missionaries and those involved in CPMs often face in this area, right? Dealing with unwritten languages,
Yeah.
navigating the complexities of trade languages,
Oh, okay.
and even encountering languages that
Uh-huh.
have been historically suppressed or outlawed.
Exactly. The temptation to rely on more widely spoken trade languages is certainly understandable, given the significant time, effort, and resources required to truly master a heart language, especially one with a complex grammar or limited resources.
Yeah, I can see that.
However, the impact of receiving the message in one's own language is undeniably profound. That poignant question from the village woman in Southeast Asia after watching the Jesus film, "Who is this Jesus who knows and speaks my language?"
Mm.
It just speaks volumes about the deep connection it fosters.
Mm.
Similarly, the example of the Kabyle Berbers in North Africa, who are now able to access resources and worship in their own long-suppressed language, demonstrates the transformative potential when the gospel is presented in a way that truly resonates with the heart.
Our eighth factor introduces the often debated role of divine signs and wonders in the emergence and growth of CPMs. This is an area where, listeners might have varied perspectives.
It's certainly a significant observation reported by many involved in these movements.
Yeah.
CPMs frequently emerge and experience rapid growth in an atmosphere where people believe they are witnessing tangible acts of God's power. This can manifest in various ways. For some, like those early believers in Bihar, India, their initial understanding and experience of Jesus is primarily as a healer.
Okay.
For others, it's experiencing what they perceive as divine protection in the midst of conflict or danger.
And the source mentions instances where missionaries who were initially perhaps more skeptical about these accounts had their perspective shifted after personally witnessing such events in places like China.
Precisely. Encounters with healings, reports of miraculous interventions, and even accounts of individuals being raised from the dead. Well, they challenged their previous theological frameworks and the understanding of God's active involvement in the world today. The dramatic story from Bihar about the young girl who seemingly died and then was revived just as accusations were being made against the evangelist, that's a particularly powerful example of how such events can deeply impact communities and influence their perceptions of faith.
It sounds like for many within these contexts, these signs and wonders aren't just isolated anecdotes. They are a tangible and integral part of their lived experience of the divine.
That's a key point, exactly. And as that church planter shared from their experience, their approach involves actively seeking out individuals who seem open to the message and praying for healing, following the instructions given by Jesus in Luke 10.
Right.
Even in situations where a miraculous healing doesn't immediately occur, the act of praying and demonstrating genuine care often leads to people experiencing God's presence and love in other significant ways.
Okay, our ninth factor focuses on a very practical but crucial element: on-the-job leadership training. With the rapid multiplication inherent in CPMs, there's obviously a clear need for effective and scalable ways to equip new leaders.
Absolutely. Traditional theological seminaries, while offering valuable in-depth training, often just can't keep pace with the exponential growth seen in church planting movements.
Yeah, I could see that being a bottleneck.
Right. Therefore, various models of practical, continuous, and decentralized on-the-job training are really a defining characteristic of these movements. Think about those mobile, 2-week rural leadership training schools in Cambodia, the more informal lay missionary schools prevalent in parts of Latin America, or the consistent mentoring of new preachers by more experienced pastors within the Gypsy CPM. Even in China, with its unique context, house church pastors often learn and grow through observing and supporting one another.
The cascading model of training widely used in India sounds particularly ingenious and effective for reaching a large number of potential leaders quickly. Could you maybe explain the core mechanics of that model again?
Yeah, it's a remarkably efficient system of multiplication. The core idea is that a highly experienced master trainer directly mentors a smaller group of initial trainers. Each of these trainers then goes on to mentor a group of local pastors or church planters, who in turn each mentor a number of church members within their own congregations.
Ah, I see.
This creates a cascading effect, allowing training and equipping to be disseminated rapidly through multiple tiers. It enables a significant number of people to receive training without being solely reliant on centralized formal institutions. Crucially, the model often includes elements of quality control and accountability at each level to ensure the integrity of the training.
So it's not just about speed and scale. There's also a built-in mechanism for ensuring a degree of consistency in what's being taught.
Exactly.
And the benefits you mentioned: exponential reach, accessibility to individuals with varying levels of literacy, the inherently interpersonal and relational nature, and even the potential for operating discreetly in sensitive contexts really highlight why this model is so well suited to many CPM environments.
Precisely. Furthermore, the very act of those being trained being expected to immediately turn around and share what they've learned reinforces the material in their own understanding and ensures a continuous flow of knowledge and leadership development within the movement.
Okay, our 10th and final factor is a more somber but important one to address. Missionaries suffered. It appears that involvement in church planting movements often comes with a significant and sometimes unexpected personal cost for those who dedicate their lives to this work.
It's a recurring and undeniable theme that the practitioners whose experiences inform our source material consistently highlight.
Yes.
Many missionaries who have played pivotal roles in the development of CPMs have, for various reasons, had to step away from their work, while others have endured immense personal hardships. The sheer variety of suffering reported is striking, ranging from serious and chronic illnesses affecting the missionaries themselves or their close family members, to tragic accidents and even instances of false accusations and legal challenges.
It really brings home the human element of this work and the often unseen challenges faced by those who commit themselves to serving in these contexts. The source mentions a wide range of difficulties, from lupus and various forms of cancer to the heartbreaking reality of birth defects in children, and the immense emotional toll leading to nervous breakdowns, a whole spectrum of profoundly difficult circumstances.
And it's not solely about physical ailments. There's also the significant emotional and spiritual toll that this kind of work can take.
Right.
The interpersonal conflicts that can arise under pressure, the constant adjustments required when assignments change unexpectedly, and even deeply tragic and seemingly inexplicable events that can derail an entire ministry and deeply impact those involved. The consistent thread, as the source emphasizes, is the clear connection between this suffering and their direct involvement in a church planting movement. And sadly, for many dedicated individuals, this suffering ultimately led to their being unable to continue in the very work they were so passionate about.
But the source also offers some valuable lessons, doesn't it? Lessons that missionaries and others in similar roles have learned to help them persevere through these inevitable challenges.
Absolutely. Strategies such as cultivating strong and reliable accountability partners, committing to regular spiritual disciplines, and prioritizing physical well-being,
Mhm.
establishing healthy boundaries within family and ministry life, building robust prayer networks, and maintaining a spirit of humility and gratitude are all highlighted as crucial for resilience. And importantly, recognizing that while there may be opposition, the focus should be on love and understanding rather than viewing individuals as the primary adversary.
Right.
Ultimately, as the source concludes by referencing that powerful passage from Revelation, this suffering can be understood within the larger context of a spiritual battle, where overcoming challenges comes through faith, testimony, and a commitment that transcends even the fear of death, while acknowledging the reality of opposition.
So to recap our deep dive today, we've explored 10 frequently observed factors in church planting movements around the world. A climate of uncertainty in society,
Mm.
insulation from outsiders, a high cost for following Christ, bold, fearless faith,
Mhm.
family-based conversion patterns, immediate enlistment of new believers,
Mm.
worship in the heart language,
Right.
divine signs and wonders, on-the-job leadership training, and the often unseen reality that missionaries involved in these movements often experience significant suffering.
And it's so important to reiterate that while these patterns appear frequently, each movement is ultimately unique, deeply shaped by its own specific cultural, historical, and social context.
Yeah,
There really is no single blueprint for how these movements emerge and grow.
absolutely. So here's something for you to really consider as we wrap up. How might these underlying dynamics, the power of uncertainty to open people to new ideas, the strength found in close community bonds, the deepening of commitment in the face of difficulty, the effectiveness of grassroots leadership development, how might these resonate in other areas of significant societal change and growth?
Interesting question.
Even those far beyond the realm of religious movements,
Mm.
what can we learn from these powerful examples about how movements of all kinds take hold, adapt, and spread within communities facing diverse challenges? We really encourage you to reflect on the specific examples we've explored today and consider their broader implications in the world around you.